The morning I found the first HOA letter stuffed in my mailbox was the day my life started to fall apart. I had just finished collecting eggs from my hens, the early sun casting golden streaks over my 6-acre farm outside Pine Creek. This land was my legacy, left to me by my grandfather, a place where I had built a simple but fulfilling life. The smell of fresh earth, the rhythmic clucking of my chickens, and the gentle bleating of my 2 goats had been my daily soundtrack for 5 years. Then Karen Whitfield moved in. The first time we met, she stood at the property line in spotless white pants and a silk blouse, staring at my coop with thinly veiled disgust. "Is that your rooster making that awful racket at 5 a.m.?" she asked, skipping pleasantries altogether. "That's Harold," I said, forcing a smile. "He's just doing his job. Farm animals make noise sometimes." "That's country living." Karen's lips pinched together like she had tasted something sour. "This isn't the country anymore. This is Oak Ridge Estates, and we have standards." I explained, politely, that my farm had been here long before her upscale subdivision was built next door. It had different zoning laws. Her HOA rules didn't apply to me. She squinted at my vegetable garden, my weathered barn, and the compost pile near my fence. "We'll see about that. I'm on the HOA board now, and we don't allow unsightly farm activities that lower property values." I should have taken her more seriously. I really should have. After that, the letters started coming weekly, official-looking violations stamped with the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo. Too many chickens. Improper fencing. Unsanitary compost piles. Each letter threatened fines I wasn't legally obligated to pay. I ignored them, but something told me to keep them. Then came the complaints. Karen called the city about my goats. She claimed the stench of my compost ruined her backyard experience. She took pictures from the road, showing HOA members evidence of my neglected farm. Soon, the friendly waves from my Oak Ridge neighbors stopped. Lisa Martinez, one of the only people still friendly, leaned over my fence one evening. "Karen's been showing pictures of your farm at HOA meetings," she warned. "Some people believe her. Others just don't want trouble." "Can she actually do anything?" I asked. "My property isn't part of Oak Ridge." Lisa hesitated. Her husband's friends with someone on the county zoning board. She's been talking about getting the boundaries redrawn. I didn't sleep well that night. 2 weeks later, I had to leave town to care for my sick mother. Before I left, I installed security cameras. I asked my friend Miguel to check on my animals. I even called the sheriff, voicing my concerns about potential trespassing. "What's the worst that could happen in 2 weeks?" Miguel said, trying to reassure me. When I returned, I had my answer. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto my road. The sky was smudged gray, a lingering haze of smoke. The scent hit me next, charred wood and burnt earth. My stomach dropped. I floored the gas pedal. When my farm came into view, I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding against gravel. Everything was gone. The barn was a blackened skeleton against the sky. The chicken coop, reduced to ash. My vegetable stands, burned to the ground. My entire farm was wiped out in a single, merciless blaze. The only thing untouched. My house. I stumbled from my truck, barely able to breathe. "Henrietta? Cluck? Ruby?" I called, hoping against hope that my chickens had somehow escaped. Only silence answered me. Tires crunched against my driveway. A white SUV pulled up. Karen stepped out, spotless as ever, a man in a tailored suit beside her. "Looks like the farm problem has been taken care of," she said casually, surveying the ruins with what looked like satisfaction. I turned, fists clenching. "What do you mean taken care of?" The man cleared his throat. "I'm Gerald Thompson, president of Oak Ridge Estates HOA. While you were away, we held an emergency meeting about the situation your farm was creating." "Situation?" I repeated, my voice hollow. Karen sniffed. "The smell, the noise, the unsightly mess. You have no idea how much my property value dropped just being next to this." Gerald nodded. "We sent you 3 notices. After no response, we took action under HOA Bylaw 47B. You burned down my farm," I croaked. "You killed my animals. That's illegal. That's criminal." Karen shrugged. "We hired a contractor to remove violations. If things got out of hand, while dry conditions contributed to the spread." I was shaking now, rage and grief colliding in my chest. "You have no authority over my farm. I wasn't part of Oak Ridge." Karen's smirk widened. "Actually, you are now. The county rezoned this area last month. Your little farm is officially part of Oak Ridge Estates. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Could that be true? You should start bringing the rest of your property into compliance, Gerald added smoothly. You have 30 days. Karen laughed. Or what? You'll sick your chickens on us. Oh wait, you can't. Something inside me snapped. I straightened, looked her dead in the eyes. You've made a huge mistake, Karen, and you're going to regret it. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. The first clue was the survey marker. Through the ashes, a glint of metal caught my eye, the county property marker. Still standing. Something wasn't adding up about this rezoning. I spent the next 72 hours digging through zoning laws, county records, and property surveys. Then, I found it. The HOA had overstepped its legal boundary. The eastern half of my property, where my barn, coop, and garden once stood, had never been rezoned. They burned down land that wasn't even under their jurisdiction. And that made this criminal destruction of private property. I didn't just call the sheriff. I called my lawyer. I called the media. And I called every single reporter who would listen. Karen had wanted my farm gone. Now, the entire world was about to know what she did. And she wasn't ready for what came next. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, reporters were knocking at my door. Local TV stations ran headlines like, HOA accused of destroying family farm, and illegal rezoning leads to arson allegations. Karen had wanted my farm erased from existence, but instead, she had put herself and the HOA under a national spotlight. The sheriff arrived before noon, along with county inspectors. I watched from my porch as they surveyed the damage, measuring the property markers and taking notes. Sheriff Lawson, a no-nonsense type who had been in Pine Creek longer than anyone, walked up to me. You sure about pressing charges? He asked. I nodded. They burned my animals alive. They don't get to walk away from that. Sheriff Lawson sighed. I can tell you this much. This ain't just a zoning dispute anymore. This is arson, criminal damage, and someone's going to prison. He turned toward Karen's house, where she was peeking from behind her curtains, her face pale. For the first time since this started, she didn't look smug. Karen had built her little kingdom on intimidation and deceit, but now the walls were crumbling. As the investigation deepened, the corruption unraveled. Turns out, Karen's husband had pulled strings at the zoning board, but he'd done so illegally. The rezoning? Fake. The county never approved it, meaning the HOA had no legal claim to my property. And the worst part? The contractors they hired to demolish my farm? Unlicensed thugs with a history of fraud. Gerald Thompson, the HOA president, was the first to crack. Under pressure from law enforcement, he flipped on Karen in exchange for a lighter sentence. He admitted to everything. How Karen had orchestrated the entire scheme, how she had convinced the board to approve the demolition, how she laughed when my barn burned. Karen was arrested the next day. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. Karen, once the queen of the HOA, now sat in the defendant's chair, her lawyer doing his best to spin the story. But the evidence was overwhelming: security footage of her directing the so-called contractors, financial records showing the illegal payments, and, of course, Gerald's testimony. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before delivering the verdict: guilty. Karen was sentenced to 8 years in prison for conspiracy, arson, and destruction of private property. The HOA was dissolved by court order. The county held an emergency vote, and the zoning board members involved in the scam were fired. As for me, I got my land back. With the settlement money from the lawsuit, I rebuilt. Neighbors, the good ones, volunteered to help. My new barn was bigger. The coop is sturdier. A month later, I brought home new animals, chickens, goats, and even a rescued donkey named Clyde. Lisa, my loyal neighbor, smiled as she watched the new life return to my farm. Karen would lose her mind if she saw this. I laughed. That's the best part. As I leaned against my fence, watching the sunset over my restored farm, I knew one thing for sure. Karen tried to bury me, but all she did was plant a seed. Months passed, and the chaos faded. The town moved on, and so did I. But one final surprise awaited me. One evening, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Karen's lawyer. Inside was a single-page note, scrawled in Karen's unmistakable, furious handwriting. Enjoy your farm while you can. This isn't over. I chuckled and tossed the letter into the fire. Karen had lost everything, her power, her influence, her home. And soon, she would lose years of her life behind bars. This was over. The farm had survived. And so had I. And as the last embers of her threat turned to ash, I smiled. Because no matter what, I had already won.